Thank you all. So it's nice to be here in Bristol. I'm living in Warren and live right next to Burrs Hill Park. If you all know where Burrs Hill Park is, across the street from the town beach. If you look right up in that corner of the park, you find my house. And I've lived there for almost 40 years now. But 2 years ago, just after I retired, some people came and dug a hole in the ground in the park. They reburied the Massasoit. He was the Native American leader who met the Pilgrims in 1621 and established a peaceful relation that lasted over 50 years. Not long after that, I got a hold of a woman over in the corner I'm about to introduce, Ellen Hirsch-Trader, who lived in Barrington and had come up with the idea of creating a Soames heritage area that would celebrate those 50 years of peace and help people learn about the history of this area in the 17th century. So Helen began doing some talking, and I'm going to show you just 1 minute of a 4-minute video that she did. Helen, come on up here. She came up with this idea years ago, and unfortunately left the area to travel to Colorado and now South Dakota, where she and her husband are retired. But she's back here today, and I said, why don't you come and I'll introduce you to the program. And I don't know if you want to say anything, but I can show them the video.
Go ahead with the video.
Okay.
It can be argued that Soames is the pivotal place of cultural exchange between indigenous people and colonizing settlers in North America. Few people realize that there was a peace treaty between the Pokanoket tribe and the Puritans established around March 21st, 1621, which lasted over 50 years. One idea to consider is the establishment of a Soames National Heritage District, which could provide a framework for an appreciation of Soames and the role of the Pokanoket in the heritage of our country. A Soames district could provide an encompassing approach featuring the essential cultural, natural, scenic, historic, and recreational open spaces of Soames in a way that celebrates this layered history for residents and draws new visitors. If we begin now, we could ensure that the Soames Heritage District is well established before the 400th anniversary of the Peace Treaty in 2021.
There you go.
That's great.
Now you don't have to talk. You've already said it.
Good job.
Thank you. So, what this is all about is really creating an awareness of the people who lived here for 10,000 years. Okay. While the pyramids were being built in Egypt and while Greece and Rome were established, these folks had already lived here for 4,000 or 5,000 years. Okay, so this is an ancient civilization. But few people know about it because of the things that happened during the 17th century. The tribe that occupied this area was not called the Wampanoag. They were called Pokanoket. Okay? And the specific area where the Massasoit, or great leader of that tribe, lived was Soames, meaning the southern area. This area in the south, along the coast here. This is Bristol. So you're very familiar with the southern area, and you live where the Massasoit and his tribe used to live. Their territory went all the way up almost to Boston and included both Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket as well. The group that you hear of mostly today is from the Mashpees, who live on the Cape, but who in some ways claim this whole area as well. But the tribe who really occupied that area is the Pokanoket, who are alive and well today, and you'll hear more about them. So folks who lived here and occupied this land all that time were successful because they lived with the land and not just on the land. Not until the 1500s were they interrupted in that successful life by European traders who came over, first of all, just to trade, not to colonize, but over time decided, particularly in 1620, that this was a wonderful place to reside. Unfortunately, some of the traders, just prior to the arrival of the Mayflower in 1620, had brought with them, unknown to them, infectious diseases. And between 1616 and 1619, 90% of the indigenous population along the coast here died. So much so that there weren't enough people alive to bury the dead. So the Pilgrims came into Patuxet, what we call Plymouth today, and found nothing but bones on the ground. It was one of the most devastating die-offs, if you will, of any indigenous population in North America. The group was led by Osamequin, or Yellowfeather, who was the Massasoit. He was one in a line of Massasoits. Think president, okay? Massasoit Osamequin, like President Truman, okay? This is a statue. Nobody knows exactly what it looks like, but this is what you'll find in Plymouth if you go visit there. And here's a painting done by a woman in Martha's Vineyard. It's more contemporary, showing the red horseman's coat that he was given by Ed Winslow soon after the Pilgrims' arrival. The Massasoit, in his wisdom, said, "I've lost so many people along the coast, including my warriors, that I need help to defend myself and my tribe from the Narragansetts, who were very interested in moving into this area because of the wealth of resources here, and who had already moved into the Providence area, which subsequently they gave to Roger Williams. Providence had been Pokanoket territory about 25 years before that. So the Massasoit came to Plymouth in March 22nd, 1621, with 60 of his warriors. Arranged a meeting that was translated by Somerset or Tisquantum, and were able to hammer out a 6-point treaty, celebrated now on the back of the Sacagawea dollar coin. Anybody ever looked at that coin? Okay. That's on the back, and that's the only place that the U.S. government, to my knowledge, has ever acknowledged the Wampanoag Treaty. It really should say Pokanoket Treaty. But that was a key agreement, a 6-point agreement that permitted the English to survive, and with the help of the Pokanokets, and helped Massasoit's tribes survive against the Narragansetts, because the English had something no tribe had at that time: guns. Thank you. So here's Ed Winslow. He's one of the few people from the Mayflower who had a contemporary painting, a painting done during his lifetime. There's also some evidence of the place where the Massasoit was living when Ed Winslow decided in July of 1621 to come pay the Massasoit a visit down here. If you go back to Guy Fessenden in 1855, he would say that Massasoit was living in Warren. And then Virginia Baker followed that up and dedicated the Massasoit Spring at the end of Baker Street in Warren, saying that that must be where the Massasoit resided because there's a spring there. But then Tom Bicknell came by and wrote another book and said, no, you're both wrong. It was really Barrington. So I'm not going to argue with anybody from Barrington or Warren. But if you go look at the town hall in Warren, anytime you drive by on Main Street, look up at the frieze, you know, the sculpture, if you will, on the over the door in the building. It says Soames 1621 and has a profile of an Indian, unfortunately with a Western headdress on. but the town thought that much about Soames and its heritage there that they incorporated that into their town hall. So Ed Winslow comes back again 2 years later, 1623, because he heard that the Massasoit was deathly ill, and found, actually on his way here, it's a 2-day walk from Plymouth, had heard that the Massasoit had died, and then they got word that he was still okay, but he's still alive, but on his deathbed. Winslow did what any good English leader would do, and gave him a concoction of different compotes, scraped his tongue, and did whatever you could do to administer some healing art to the Massasoit. And lo and behold, he recovers within hours. And of course the tribe thought that was a miracle, that their great leader was going to survive. And when the Massasoit was recovered and was able to talk to Winslow, he said, "You will be my friend for life." And he meant it. He kept that promise. If you wonder what this area, including Bristol, looked like then, you just go into Google Maps and erase everything. But there were large areas of open space here. Soames was known for its cleared land that Miles Standish found and said, "This is perfect for just what we need." He called it the garden of the patent and the flower of the garden, F-O-O-U-R, because he saw that as a place for the English to raise crops and their animals. This is Standish. He became a landowner, but never lived here. But he bought land actually in 1653. Another visitor to the area is none other than Roger Williams, who, if you recall, had some difficulty with the English because of his views about religious liberty. And he had first been in Plymouth and got kicked out of there, and then went to Salem, and after a year or so got people riled up in Boston. They wanted him out, so they sent some troops to take him back to England in January of 1636. And he got word of that and left, walking all the way down here. Okay, imagine in one of the worst winters that they had that year. Okay, practically froze to death and became deathly ill. Came to Soames, where he had known the Massasoit from his time in Plymouth, and the Massasoit helped nurse him back to health at a place called Margaret's Rock, which you can still visit. Ellen and I were just here yesterday. It's just over the Warren line in Swansea on private land, but Margaret's Rock, or cave, it's not much of a cave, was the place, according to the story that the Williams family celebrates, the place where Roger spent 14 weeks, recovered, and then was able to go on to Omega Pond in East Providence. Has anybody been there? Good, Bruce. It's not easy to find. The marker is way back away from the road. We're going to do a better marker out close to the road. And then there's the Daggett House and the Walker House that are from prior to 1700 there. But that was where Providence would have been if it weren't for the fact that the authorities in Plymouth said, "You're on our land, you've got to leave." So there, his crops were starting to grow. He brought his family down from Salem, and he was forced to go across the Seekonk River. And some of you may be familiar with the story where he goes over and meets Canonicus and says, "What cheer need up?" Okay, that whole story. Goes around the river, founds Providence. This is a contemporary painting of what Providence looked like in 1650. If you haven't been to the Roger Williams Memorial, it's worth a stop. You can do the whole thing in half an hour. It's down North Main Street, and you will get the whole story. You'll also pass the Weybosset Bridge, which is now the 8th version of the bridge that's always been there at that crossing, because Roger Williams was the original toll taker at that bridge. I'm not going to go through all the land changes. It would take me another half hour, but I don't have the time. But These are the indigenous to English land transfers over that time. And the one town that did not get sold until after the King Philip War, and it wasn't sold, was Bristol. But Warren, at least a little further north than the Warren line is now at Franklin Street, that north became Brooks Pasture. You know that Barrington was Warren for a period of time. Warren and Barrington were Swansea for one period of time. And Rehoboth, it was always there, but that since has been divided into Seacock and now East Providence. So a lot of changes in the land over that time. If you go up to East Providence, you will find the Newman Church. This is the oldest settlement in this area because in 1653, St. Newman brought his congregation down to an area that's really bounded by the Seacock River on the west and the 10-mile river on the east, so that everyone could have property facing a large green called the Ring of the Green and waterfront property at the back of their homes. So that's how East Providence began. You can still see some of the graves of those original families, especially if you're a carpenter. I think half the carpenter family is in there. Nearby is Hunt's Mills. Anybody been there? I'd never heard of it. That's the place along the 10-mile river where the early mills were built because the English needed to grind the things that they had. You can still see evidence of some of the later mills there. You can go to Rehoboth and find more mills. You go into the little village there near the Carpenter Museum, you'll find this waterfall, and there were markers there. There's no existing pre-1700 structures there, but there are signs marking some of the places that they built garrison houses for use during the King Philip War. This is a map I created about 15 years ago when I got into the understanding the King Philip War. And what you find is, here's Bristol, the last remaining home of the Pokanoket tribe, because they had sold land all around this area, and by 1670 were surrounded by English settlements, including Newport down below. So they were essentially surrounded by English people. Their population had dropped from about 7,000 to less than 700 by that time, largely because of disease and just the stress of occupation and the loss of land for hunting and one thing and another. Their population was going down dramatically over the 50 years of peace, while the English population was exploding, up to 50,000 English people here by 1675. Well, I mentioned 1675 because if you recall from 4th grade or wherever you first learned about the King Philip War, that's when the Pokanoket, fearing that if they continued to lose their land, they would have no country at all. They would lose their culture completely. So they went to war against the English, and if you look at what they did, they went all the way up to Deerfield and then started moving east with an attempt to move the English off the land back to England. And some of them did leave. Others went down to Newport. It was a terrible war on both sides. A third of the English towns were burnt to the ground. But the English also did some terrible things, including the Great Swamp Massacre, when the English feared that the Narragansetts were going to get involved, and they went and massacred 400 people on the island in the swamp. I won't go into all the details of the war, but it concluded with the death of King Philip at the Miry Swamp right here in Bristol. There's a marker there if you want to trek over there and see it. And then shortly after, if you were native, you were either killed outright, and legally you could be shot at 14 years old, and a lot of that happened, or removed from the area. Many of them went as far west as New York, joined other tribes, or you would be enslaved. And the enslavement was such that the native people feared that, and some of them even killed themselves, fearing enslavement. So what you had then essentially was a genocide. There's no other definition of that, of a whole population of people in the area. That permitted the English to move into the Bristol Peninsula. There was no treaty at the time. The king gave the land to 4 proprietors here in Bristol so that they could use they could sell the land and use that to pay war debts. Here's King Philip marker over here at Mount Hope. If you go up in Swansea, you'll find the marker for the Miles Garrison where the war broke out. The garrison is no longer existing. The final episode of the war took place up in Rehoboth at Anawan Rock, where Anawan, Philip's general, if you will, was captured by Newman Church and then subsequently taken to Plymouth and killed. Many other artifacts of 17th century life still exist around here, and we've spent the last couple years looking for them, and we found over 50 of them. If you open your brochure, you will find a map. Even better, if you go to the website on your phone, you'll find an interactive map that looks just like this, and you click on any of those and it'll take you to a full description of it. But these are, the criteria was anything that was in place prior to 1700. It includes 10 homes. Some of the 3 of the homes in Bristol are prior to 1700. I was just up at the Joseph Reynolds house for the tour last week. But some of the cemeteries around here, the ancient Little Neck Cemetery is a wonderful gem over in Riverside, and it contains the gravesite of Elizabeth Tilley, who came over from England on the Mayflower, married John Howland, subsequently went through the King Philip War, and then died at her sister's house after the war. Great story that needs to be told. Other places you can find in East Providence are the Brigham Farm, which dates back to that time. The Key Farm in Tawisset. I don't know if you know Byron over there, but he might, if you talk to him nice, he might give you a tour. But that was a farm that he believes was constructed prior to 1700. Hasn't changed since then. He even finds some native tools in the ground there. In the northern part of Warren, you'll find the Joetta Kirk and the Chase Farm, which was a King's Grant farm from 1697, hasn't changed since then. Okay? So there's still plenty of evidence of the 17th century around. Helen's done a wonderful job of identifying not only woods, but trees, ancient trees from that time. Some of the open areas that you can find in Soames Woods in Barrington. You have the Quick-Posset Preserve here in Bristol, and I hope you've taken the chance. It's at the Narrows. Go down to the Narrows on the water, turn around and hike up into the woods there. But those woods have not changed in that time, hasn't been occupied. And that was the site of some of the native villages going back thousands of years there. They've done an archaeological dig there as well. Going up Route 136, just past the Warren line into Swansea, across the street from Johnson's Market. Yeah. Ever seen this boulder up there? I was just up there this past Sunday again. I kept looking at it and I said, how did that get there? Well, I called the state geologist, Tim Ives, and he said, oh, that's a glacial erratic. I said, yeah, no, I know, Tim. I know what glacial erratics are. They're just large boulders deposited by the glaciers after they melt. But I said, why is this on bedrock, and why are there stones underneath propping it up? Glaciers don't do that. People do. Well, it could have been a couple of drunk college kids. I said, I don't think so, Tim. It's a very heavy rock. It would take a large group of men to move that. So I think that's a Native American rock. Right, Helen? We've been up there and looked at that.
A calendar rock.
A calendar rock, okay. And notice it points in one direction here. Across the road from that, along just south of Johnson's Market, Tim owns part of this, is King's Rock. And along the top of that rock, that's Helen up there with Tim and Carl Becker from the Swansea Historical. But there's a groove in that rock that they used to roll a stone over corn It's called the National Grinding Mill. Okay, and that whole area up there is called Sachem's Knoll, and you can see Margaret's Rock from up there when the leaves are off the trees. That was a sacred site for Native people and needs to be recognized, so we're working on that. Other places behind Swansea Town Hall, Abrams Rock, up here at Mount Hope, the Massasoit seat, and over at Newtaconicut Hill, there's also a place of Native gathering at that time. So, back to Warren. What I said was when I retired, they reburied the Massasoit. Well, the story is, this was a royal native Pokanoket burial ground in use, we believe, at least from the mid-1500s. It could have been earlier, but those artifacts have been dated because Native people would bury the dead with possessions that they would need in the next life. Well, the things they often valued the most were the things that they had traded with the English and Dutch for. So these grave sites were filled with Dutch pottery, English bottles, and all kinds of iron tools and implements and one thing or another. Those could be dated. Okay? We know when those were produced, right? So that's why we're saying about 1550, because we couldn't find anything older than that. If you want to read all about it, Susan Gibson published a whole book cataloging the whole thing in 1980. The items in that grave, those graves, there were 42 grave sites that began to be disturbed when the railroad, the Providence to Bristol Railroad, that's now the bike path, started to be built in 1854, and I found all kinds of newspaper accounts of people digging up bones and items and, disturbing graves, but no one had any idea what it was. Some people thought it had been an African-American gravesite because nothing had been marked. Finally, in 1913, Charles Card, who was the librarian for the George Hale Library, where my wife was director, decided that he was going to dig up the remaining graves. He was kind of an amateur archaeologist and had a lot of interest. So he got permission from the railroad to come in to the northern part of Burrs Hill, the part that has the hills, okay, not the flat part where the ball field is. And he and a friend of his exhumed 42 grave sites, sent those items to New York, to the Hay Museum, to Heffenrepper, and kept some of them at the Charles Whipple Green Library Museum in Warren. And that's where the Mashpee tribe started in 2007 when they got federal recognition to reclaim those burial items. That was federal law, that they belonged to them. Just like if somebody dug up your grandmother's grave and took things home with them, you get to go get it back. Okay? So they collected those things. I was there helping my wife pack that stuff up, so I'm very familiar with that. Those then were finally, after they collected over 600 items from everywhere they could find them, they got permission from the town of Warren, dug a hole in the ground like you saw earlier, put in a 10 by 10 foot concrete vault in a private ceremony that I couldn't film, returned those items to the ground and rededicated the site to Osamequin, the yellow feather, who himself was buried there because Virginia Baker found one of the grave sites had evidence of the red horseman's coat that you saw earlier. Okay? So there was a celebration that finally those people who had been exhumed and taken away from the graves were now back. So, very quickly, we've got 5 minutes, and I'll give you time for a couple questions here. Bristol was laid out following the war. One of the only towns in Rhode Island that's laid out in a grid-like fashion. And most of the towns kind of follow the old roads there. Here are the one of the three oldest buildings. You all know this one? You drive by it every day. Okay? Yeah, it said the Perry Rigo House, but it's really the Nathaniel Bosworth house because he was the first person who lived there. Anybody know how that house got built?
I don't know how, but I know why.
Why?
It's so big. churches or communities.
Right.
Before we build a church.
You couldn't have a town without a church, you couldn't have a church without a minister, you couldn't have a minister without a parsonage.
Right.
So what you do is, they got the wood for this house from England. They shipped it over. Yeah, no. Built the house and got Bosworth there, started meeting there, then built the meeting house. It's now where the State House is on the
Yeah.
green there. And back around the turn of the 20th century, that was called Silver Spring, a very elegant place. It's now, I'd love to meet the man who owns it, Mr. Rigo.
Right.
Yeah, but he's using it for apartments right now. Fortunately, it hasn't been torn down, and I hope the inside, because if they just put the paneling up, that would be fine, because that can be removed. Somebody needs to buy that house and spend $1 million on bringing it back. It is a gem. Okay, you got a project in mind? The church has its own museum now, okay, and we're going to put a historical marker there. We got funds from the Roger Williams Community Fund, and we'll put an interpretive marker on there and show that in the museum you'll find these. This is a silver chalice from 1684, okay, a pew in from the original meeting house, things of that sort. So they have their own little museum there. The other house, of course, I already mentioned, the Reynolds house. Finally got inside that one last Saturday. Yeah. And then Elm Farm, one portion, the back portion there, which had been moved there, the house. But those are, unless somebody knows something I don't know, those are the three pre-1700 houses. There are others up in Warren, the Hale Noon's farmhouse. John Martin House, I was just in that last Sunday. It's on Route 6 in Swansea. Kingsley House in Rehoboth. William Hunt House in Seacock. And the John Martin House over in Barrington. Those are the old ones. And here's the tribe today. They're still here. Okay, even though there were all kinds of attempts to drive people away, there are about 200 members of the tribe who live in the area. They get together. I was just with them down at Mount Hope Farm for their Strawberry Moon Thanksgiving Festival, and they do that every year. This is the Tribal Council today. This is them up at the Mount Hope, the King Philip seat. So now you have it. I told you everything in a nutshell. I can provide some more detail, but I'd be happy to take any questions. So. Thank you all.